webinar in partnership with PhD Chamber of Commerce in India. We're very delighted that you could take some time out. I suppose it's lunchtime in India and it's dinner time in New Zealand. So thanks very much for sacrificing. Or maybe you've got us on your phone. Technology is great these days. So one wonders when you can have a screen on your hand like the Marvel movies. But I'm sure that day is coming. But I've got a great industry captains with me today from PhD Chamber of Commerce. We've got Mr. Ajay Poddar and Vikram Gera, and from New Zealand, Special Trade Agriculture Envoy, we've got Mel Poulton. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. And also in the background, we've got Neeraj and Gary from PhD and INZBC, respectively. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time this evening. Our topic today is going to be navigating through post-COVID world, how the regulations are changing in this rapidly changing world that we live in for import and export. And the format for today will be I'll make brief introductions, bio of each of the three speakers, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Poddar to welcome on behalf of PhD Chamber of Commerce. And then he'll talk a little bit about how he sees the regulations changing from India's point of view and how it's affecting global, and then followed by Mel from a New Zealand point of view, and Vikram from a holistic global point of view. So on behalf of India-New Zealand Business Council, the council that has been there for over 30 years, we welcome our members and also the members of PhD Chamber of Commerce. It's great to have this collaboration here for both our members and wider public. We will be making a little clip of this and sharing it widely. So just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you've got a question, we've got some questions, but if you've got a question, please post it in the Q&A panel and not in the chat. So if your messages come to the chat, unfortunately, we won't be able to take that. But if you've got a question, post it on the Q&A chat panel, and we'll take that up. Also, if you've got some particular question for some speaker, do let us know in the same chat box. So I'll start off a brief introduction of Mr. Poddar, who is an entrepreneur and innovator from India, a well-known household name from IIT Delhi. He studied his BTech. He's got 35 years of experience in running successful businesses, include supply and installation of mechanical multi-level parking system, which is great in this day and age when land is scarce. He also manufactures pre-stressed concrete products, LPG cylinders, bottling, marketing of LPG. He holds IPRs for various technologies. He's also, apart from being a managing director of Synergy Environics Limited, he's also the chairman of Asean, Oceania, and East Asia Committee of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and founder member of Indian Green Building Council. He's also, his book, Empower Yourself, New Life Solutions for Health and Well-Being, published by Penguin, has been well received. His article on health and wellness have been published in many well-known publications, such as Economic Times, the Financial Times, and the Telegraph, and many others. So welcome, Mr. Poddar. We're very grateful for your time and for your insights, and we look forward to our discussions. And over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. That was a very flattering introduction. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar, which has been hosted by the India-New Zealand Business Council. My special welcome to Mel Poulton, New Zealand Special Agricultural Trade Envoy, and my co-panelist, Mr. Vikram Gera. And this is a very important webinar series New Zealand, made by the New Zealand Business Council. On my personal behalf and on behalf of the PhD Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all the dignitaries, all the participants for today's webinar. Friends, PhD Chamber is a 115-year-old chamber which actively represents trade and industry and the government interface. And we are present in about 23 out of the 29 states in India and 2 union territories. We have a special focus on medium and small industries and enterprises, and we are in touch at the grassroots level with people. We have strong national and international linkages. Just for your information, last year we had organized a very important India-Asean summit in New Delhi, which was attended by more than 350 people. And you would be surprised to know that we had not funded anybody to come and attend this summit. So people, more than about 70 delegates from overseas had come paying their own money and making their own arrangements. So PhD Chamber has pledged to actually fulfill our Prime Minister Narendra Modi's pledge to make India self-reliant based on economy, infrastructure, technology, and vibrant demography and demand. And we would like to do whatever we can. The PhD Chamber during these times, during the COVID times, has been organizing interactive video conferences and webinars. And we've done a lot of sessions, even under this committee, with Australia, with Vietnam, with Japan, with Myanmar, with Singapore, to name a few. And the Chamber holds almost 2 webinars a day, and on various important subjects. And we are also doing virtual trade conferences. We are doing multilateral virtual B2B meetings. So we have something coming up with Vietnam more recently, and we'd be very happy to do it with you and your members, should you be interested. So I think we look forward to working with INZBC in the future to form a bridge and have fruitful engagements to help the industry connect with the right partners in both the countries. So just a few things I'd just like to say, that there is a concern in New Zealand about India not signing the RCEP, but that has been there because some of our key concerns have not been met. But going forward, I think we are still engaged, and the other people are looking at how to address our concerns. And to me, it seems that it should happen next year. By next year, we are on the right track. And the other key things I'm looking at is a very robust, we do have some disadvantages for trade. One is the amount of demand which is there in New Zealand, and of course the freight. And the Indian brand equity also needs to be more reinforced. So, but what I am very gung-ho and hopeful about is the technology transfer, and Indian people establishing manufacturing facilities in New Zealand to feed the Australian market, and not the other way around. So to feed the New Zealand market and the Australian market, and vice versa. In fact, we had been dialoguing with some people in New Zealand through Australia. So obviously there is some gap about the amount of interaction that India and New Zealand have together. So I think if we want to make things successful, we've got to create platforms whereby more Indian people know about the opportunities in New Zealand and vice versa, and to have the right partners, because it's very important to get partnerships going. So if we can know that these are the companies in this kind of thing, what is the size of companies? You see, just sending a list and saying these is company in agriculture and this company in this doesn't help, because you've got to match people like to like. And I also see a big opportunity in establishing joint ventures in Southeast Asia, where India and New Zealand partner together and then service both their markets. And of course, Southeast Asia itself is a big market. And one of the key things here I feel is that India and New Zealand are natural partners. We have a lot of goodwill. All the people whom I've met from New Zealand, all the Kiwis, I've got a very good feeling. We had a very good interaction with your Deputy Prime Minister and your Trade Minister on the 25th of February when they came. And this was, of course, just before the lockdown, so we couldn't progress much. But I think we need many more interactions like that. So I'll I think I'll stop here and we can carry on later with the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay, for that introduction. And also I've noted a few points that we'll discuss when we are going into the Q&A. Now we are joined by Mel Poulton, who's the New Zealand's Special Agricultural Trade Envoy. Mel has just taken over in February this year from Mike, who was a great advocate, and certainly he's done a few trips to India, and Mel waits for his first maiden trip, especially after the COVID. The role that Mel is in, it was established by New Zealand government ministers to bring farmers' perspective to international trade in food and agriculture, and to build partnerships with farming organizations and companies offshore. The SAT position supports the government's objectives of raising the value of New Zealand agricultural goods and services and transitioning the agriculture sector to low emission and climate resilient future. Mel is a food and fiber producer working with her husband and the team on their intergenerational family business based in the Tataru district in Lower North Island, actually in Dennyworth, like we were talking before. Like most of New Zealand food and fiber producers, their products are exported to markets around the world, so trade is vitally important. She is active and committed to environmental stewardship, starting with projects on the farm, at home, environment and initiatives in a local community and region. Mel is an advocate for rural communities and works on enhanced digital connectivity in her district. As a food and fiber producer for the SAT role, Mel is focused on building and enhancing relationship to share New Zealand's food and environmental stewardship story in the world and working to advance New Zealand's trade interest and opportunities. Welcome, Mel. And we'd like to hear a brief introduction from you and what you think the current state of the world is, especially from New Zealand perspective. So over to you, Mel.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here. It's a fantastic privilege, and I'm looking forward to continuing many conversations beyond this webinar. So, look, I think from you've given me a fantastic introduction, and everybody else can get a good feel of where I'm from and what I do. And I want to be really clear that I'm no trade negotiator, and I'm certainly not all over living and breathing trade details every day around tariffs and all the rest of it. But I do value trade, and it's certainly extremely important to New Zealand. So with regard to the COVID pandemic and the impacts here in New Zealand, I think as a food producer, there was a number of factors that impacted on us, but really the biggest issue for many food producers in New Zealand was actually the drought, and that took probably a bigger impact on many of us than COVID itself. That said, COVID certainly had its impacts around trade and exports, and also around our ability to pick, for example, apples and kiwi fruit. There was a big issue around that, and a lot of people having to do quite a bit of work to figure out how they were going to harvest the crop and get it packed and get it off to market. So there was a number of challenges that we faced right throughout the whole value chain, from the farm right through to consumers around the world. So we certainly weren't immune to those impacts. And that said, you know, drought probably had a greater impact on those of us with livestock as opposed to those in the horticulture sector or even viticulture. Wine had probably one of its best seasons, along with kiwi fruit and apples, you know, really, really good quality crops. So where environment and climate has an impact on one, it's a benefit to another. So that's just the nature of farming and food production, and I'm sure many people in India are well aware of that. But I'd like to touch on some key themes regarding COVID and the fact that there were some general disruptions and uncertainty around the trade environment, as you'll all be well aware of. And as far as our trade recovery, sorry, let me just go back. Market disruption was another one. There was reduced capacity and increased costs due to physical distancing with regard to processing and packing. And there was also, you know, our trade teams and our trade ministers were working really, really hard to ensure that the supply and value chains were all working and functioning, and that the infrastructure was in place at ports, both seaports and airports, to ensure that freight could continue. And there was, you know, a particular interest around, you know, keeping those systems open for food, essential goods, and medication or medical supplies, so that people could respond to the COVID pandemic. So those were a number of things that were felt in New Zealand and things that we actually worked to achieve and overcome. And I think one of the highlights for me amongst it all was that, you know, our whole team, whether it be a food producer right through to your packers and processors, your logistics and distribution, through to government teams, be it with MFAT, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or the Ministry of Primary Industries, or even our trade ministers, everybody came together in their own spheres of influence and really worked hard as a whole team to ensure that New Zealand could navigate its way through with being nimble and flexible and adaptive, proactive and solutions focused. And I think that's a real highlight for New Zealand, you know, being a small nation, is that we are able to come together and really work on solutions in times of crisis. So I think I'll leave it there and hand it back.
Thank you very much, Mel. Very informative, and we look forward to the discussions shortly. It's great to have Vikram Gera with us. He's the Senior Vice President of TR Chadha and Co. Chartered Accountants, a very well-known firm in India. He's also handling the direct tax matters at TRC and is responsible for business development firm. He's also the chairman at Australia, New Zealand and India Business Association in India, and the co-chairman of International Affairs Committee at PhD Chamber of Commerce for Central Europe, and also on the Direct Tax Committee at PhD Chamber of Commerce. He's led many delegations on behalf of PhD with Honorable Vice President of India, and he's also active in various business associations. He's got a bachelor's degree in commerce and holds a degree in law. He's well traveled, and we are very grateful and fortunate to have Vikram with us. And over to you, Vikram.
Thank you, Sunil. And it's a great pleasure to be on this platform. And my hearty welcome to all the delegates, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm glad to be part of this webinar series with both the organizations, the India-New Zealand Business Council and PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, taking the right steps towards helping its members in the industry. I'm optimistic that we will collaborate even more in the coming future and bring the synergies of both INZBC and PHDCCI for the benefit of all. India and New Zealand historically share close and cordial ties. The foundations of our relationship have already well established. Despite the difference in size, New Zealand and India have much in common, including the democratic systems of government, historic ties through the Commonwealth, and a common business language. We also have long-standing people-to-people links. Sir Edmund Hillary's conquest of Everest and work with Indian communities is legendary in both countries, and our links are even deeper and richer. India has been a key destination for New Zealand travelers, adventurers, and businesses for many decades, while New Zealand has benefited from skilled migrants, student exchanges, and rapid increases in tourist numbers from India. New Zealand and India have warm and lively sporting rivalries as well, including cricket, a sport in which our two countries are consistently among the best teams in the world. Strong business relationships. Free trade and globalization have undoubtedly been good overall for New Zealand, India, and the world. Yet it is also true that in some countries around the world, the rapid growth in global trade, the creation of new value chains, and the emergence of new markets and huge pools of relatively inexpensive labor have undoubtedly led to large-scale and relatively rapid economic dislocation. Both the countries are growing economies. India's economic growth has been booming. It's currently the world's sixth largest economy, and the Honorable Prime Minister Modi has expressed a hope that it will be within the top 3 in the next 15 years. Experts project that by 2050, India's economy will be the second biggest in the world, behind China and ahead of the United States. To help make this possible, India has been making reforms that has seen it to rise 77th in the world rank ease of doing business rankings, with ambitious to be in the top 50 in 2020. And perhaps the most powerful motivating factor behind India's economic performance is the desire to transform the lives of its people. I think I should end there, and then we could probably take up a few more question and answer session.
There's a lot of people that have just joined us. Welcome to everyone on this special COVID webinar. I also welcome you on behalf of INZBC and PhD Chamber of Commerce, and also from the Indian High Commission here in New Zealand. Their support has been immense, so welcome everyone. Just housekeeping rules. We've just had the 3 speakers make brief comment, and then we've got some questions for them that have been sent by you. Please use the Q&A chat that is there rather than the chat room, because we will be monitoring the Q&A session, Q&A chat room more rather than the private chat that is there. So just the first question, can I please put it towards Ajay, that has been sent by one of our webinar people attendees. As you know, the world is looking at various other destinations of manufacturing, and you touched on manufacturing. How is India welcoming the world to its shores, and what is the point of difference between India and China on the offering, Ajay?
Well, I would not like to directly compare, but I can tell you what is there, which India is offering. Just by giving you an example, that about 4 years back, 5 years back, China was the #1 destination for manufacture of mobile phones in the world. And now it is India. So many of the people, many of the mobile cell phone manufacturers have shifted base and based very large capacities in India. 2 or 3 distinct advantages which India gives is, one is that it has a lot of skilled manpower, technology. So if you are looking at technological understanding, if you are looking at native intelligence, that's definitely, it's well acknowledged that it scores. Secondly, it's the language. As far as China is concerned, the language of communication, there is a huge problem. We know that. So also, I think in India, people are, even the workmen are quite creative. So there is a lot of input which comes from the shop floor and things like that. And of course, we are a democracy. There are more laws. The respect for law, the respect is much more. And so I think these are some of the advantages, and I think we are seeing a movement from China to India, and also, of course, to the other countries, because people are feeling vulnerable. People are feeling a little less secure.
Mel, I want to ask you a question just sent by Rajan Bhattacharya. He's talking about what's the landscape of New Zealand for joint venture partnerships in agri-food and horticulture sector. What's the appetite of New Zealand sectors in these areas for joint ventures with companies from India?
Look, I think New Zealand has always positioned itself as a partner and a collaborator, and I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for various ways to actually work together and create solutions and find ways of producing food and securing, working together around food security, working together around how we can use ag tech. There's a whole raft of ways that New Zealand and India can work together, and I think there's plenty of appetite for that. And an example of that would be what Apple and Pears New Zealand did or is doing up in India there with the World Bank program and growing apples. And I think there's a whole lot of benefits to that, and we've got to sort of think about the benefits going back to the people and to local communities, and how can we work together in a way that brings people together, brings communities together, and advances everybody's. There's mutual benefit for everybody in it. So I think there's appetite for it, and it's just a matter of bringing people together. And I think one of the key things around that is businesses having confidence to actually work together, and those that's an important part of trade agreements, is actually having the frameworks to give businesses confidence that they can do business to business arrangements and work through opportunities, be it a joint venture, a partnership, or any other way of working. I think there's opportunities to do that, and that's one of the mutual benefits to both New Zealand and India around trade and trade agreements.
Well, I'd just like to maybe ask you another question, because you mentioned something about food security, and after you, I would ask, Vikram, the same thing around how is, you mentioned about food security, especially during COVID, right? And New Zealand being an island nation of 5 million people, with most of the airlines stopped flying across or bringing anything. How did New Zealand manage their food security for its people?
Yeah, well, I think from our perspective, we're a large producer of food, and that's why we're such an export nation, is that we produce way more than what we can consume. But that said, with COVID, there were people going out of jobs, and people were concerned about being able to keep their own families fed. So there was quite a lot of work where, again, organic community initiatives happened where, companies were donating food, meat companies, Zespri was donating food, kiwi fruit. There was a whole range of people working together to ensure that those that had actually lost their incomes and were unsure of whether they'd be able to keep their family fed, there was a huge amount of work domestically to make sure that they all had food. So that's one side of it. But I think the other side of it too is New Zealand's ability to partner with other countries to help them find solutions and be a solutions partner to creating food security for other countries. And, a lot of people might assume that means New Zealand just exporting food, but I think it's more than that. It's about how can we work together in other countries to grow food and think about ways like apples and pears with growing fruit offshore, partnering with other countries to do that. So there's a lot of elements to the food security thing, and for New Zealand, in that during the lockdown there was plenty we were doing domestically, but also there were conversations around how can we make sure that food, being an essential good, could actually get to markets from New Zealand, but also for other countries, ensuring their own food systems were actually working.
Yeah, Mel, Vikram, just coming to you, I mean, New Zealand's got only 5 million mouths to feed, whereas India's got a
Right.
billion, right? So there's a big
Yeah.
difference. So how do you think this COVID or current scenario of COVID has impacted the regulatory norms in India, both from a financial market or from markets as well as feeding the people?
Sunil, we also have a similar experience what Mel was sharing, that I was talking to the Punjab Chief Minister a few weeks back on another webinar, because Punjab is basically known as the granary of the country. And he was sharing his thoughts, and he said this year the production of grains has been the maximum. We've had about 14 lakh ton of grains which were produced this year. So we've had a record produce, but at the same time, during this COVID period where a lot of people, there were migrant laborers and a lot of people have lost their jobs. So a lot of corporates, in fact, everybody had actually come together. A lot of corporates took up the responsibility of feeding migrant laborers, and even as PhD, a lot of our members did a lot of voluntary service. They were feeding a lot of our colleagues and friends, including myself. We were involved with a lot of the non-governmental sectors where the chief responsibility was to feed people, and local NGOs, and we were feeding about 500 people every single day.
I'll come back to Vikram, but Ajay, just coming to you, New Zealand has a good trade relationship with ASEAN, and India also plays an important role there. What are the synergies between both the countries to collaborate, especially in the ASEAN market?
As I said, joint ventures. I see that as a very strong thing, because there are good business people and strong technologies from New Zealand. And they are also familiar, they are comfortable doing business in the Southeast ASEAN market, maybe also investing. So is India. So I think that's the starting point, and that's where we can marry our technologies and take care of the South ASEAN market. And because I think Indians, there are a lot of Indian people who are already very comfortable and familiar with the ASEAN market, and they have a lot of trade linkages, and so that is what the Indian people can bring to the table. There are a lot of technologies which have been developed in India and which are being developed. I would give an example of healthcare, just to make an illustration. Today there are technologies where you can do a eye test for something like 0.8 rupees. So in cents, I don't know how much that costs. You can do an ECG. You can go do a heart test for less than $1. These are the kind of prices. Or you can do a blood test for $2. You can do a urine test for $2. So these are the kind of technologies. These are the kind of things which we can make. Testing kits, all that. And you see, Southeast Asia also has not been affected so much by COVID. And of course, New Zealand is a prime example where you've done it very successfully. So I think joint ventures are the way forward.
Sure. Mel, I've got a question here from Vivek, who's watching the webinar. He said, what is the size of avocado market in New Zealand and the scope of setting pack houses? Like, I think Ajay was also talking about it, about setting up manufacturing out here. So what Vivek wants to know is the scope of setting up pack houses for fruits in New Zealand to export to India from a regulatory point of view. So, Mel.
Well, jeepers, well, I'm certainly not the expert in the avocado industry or the regulatory space, but the avocado industry certainly has been growing significantly here in New Zealand, and I would probably point you straight to Jen Schooler, who's the CEO of Avocados New Zealand, to really explore those opportunities. But I would say that if there's an opportunity to grow and to work together that's mutually beneficial, and we can find a way through ease of business, then it's certainly worth looking at. And never say no. Get into it.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Vikram, thanks. I think we got cut earlier. But
Yes.
In this post-COVID world, what are the new markets that are emerging in India, and how are people adapting with the change in the whole import-export market?
So a couple of points, Sunil, that India has begun to work on a continuity plan to kickstart exports once the country emerges from the shadows of the COVID-19 pandemic. The plan includes cutting down import dependence, especially from China, by focusing aggressively on substitution while improving safety compliance and quality goods to gain global market share. The Commerce and Industry Ministry is mulling setting up groups to draw up strategies for sectors where China has vacated space and countries are looking to diversify suppliers. The Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme could give the much needed fillip to the country's disrupted business operations by promoting Make in India manufacturing, encourage substitution of imports of low technology goods from other countries, particularly from China, and encourage local produce at low prices. The 20 lakh crore stimulus package announced by the government focuses on tax breaks for small businesses as well as incentives for domestic manufacturing. The lateral free assistance handed out to MSMEs will help crank up their operations. This move could help recover India's factory output, which plummeted to record lows in March, with the index of industrial production contracting to 16.7%. As per an analysis done by the Commerce Department, medical textiles, electronics, plastics, and toys are some sectors whose exports can be promoted in the next 3 months or phase 1, while phase 2 exports could include gems and jewelry, pharmaceuticals, and steel in the next 6 months. According to the Federation of Indian Exports Organizations, COVID-19 will emerge as a non-tariff barrier as countries would insist on various certifications. We need to maintain those SOPs and provide digital certificates. And, for India, Oceania countries are major trading partners and major sources of investment, and there is a huge untapped potential that can be achieved. India has made efforts in the recent past to take economic ties to the next level and have some sort of broad-based comprehensive trade agreement. There is a need to take these efforts to a logical conclusion. And so those are my thoughts, initial thoughts for that.
Mr. Poddar, I'll come to you. Why is it that Indian businesses try and stay away from New Zealand? Is it because of its regulation or distance or the size of the market?
See, I think the distance and the size of the market are obvious ones, but I think that there is also less awareness about the opportunities. So that is because we need to increase engagement. Though there is so much goodwill between the countries, but the engagement, the delegations going to and fro, or the exchanges. So I think we need, as I was mentioning, we need to have more virtual meetings, we need to have more virtual exhibitions, and we need to have some robust partnerships. So we have to identify partners, and that will make it happen. The other thing which can actually attract Indian businessmen, which you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you have probably more goods coming from Australia to New Zealand than going from New Zealand to Australia?
No, that wouldn't be right in saying so.
Okay, so I was just looking at a possibility where if people send goods to New Zealand and whatever they want to ship to Australia also, because if there's a reverse freight which is more economical, then that could be a route. but perhaps my understanding is wrong. I just want to put a word about COVID, because there is this, everything seems to be centered around COVID. I feel that it's basically there is an agenda of scaring people. And if we actually look at the number of deaths which occur from flu, from other diseases all over the world, they are much more than COVID. And the kind of, the press has scared the hell out of everybody. And I think it's time now, and people are realizing that they're just getting back to business and doing things and just keeping their immunity up. And it's okay. It's not what as dangerous as it's made out to be. And this whole thing of vaccinations being a savior, because the vaccinations that you are developing today are the COVID strains which were there 4 months before. But the disease is mutating every day. And what you are developing is not useful today. So it's just about increasing our immunity rather than relying on drugs or in vaccinations which will reduce our immunity and make us more susceptible. So I just wanted to say that to everyone.
Thank you. I'll just, Rahul Sen has asked a question, and maybe, I'll open it to three, starting from Mel. Mel, there's a big drive around Indo-Pacific at the moment. And, from a food safety point of view, what role does New Zealand play in the Pacific, from a food safety point of view?
Yeah, so food safety is really important to New Zealand. And again, we've got to have really high standards around food safety in order to have access to a diverse range of markets all around the world. And so the highest our food safety standards are, that means the more access to more markets and diversity that we have. So New Zealand has a lot of knowledge around this space. We have a lot of really good systems around this space. And I know that there's been work between New Zealand and other countries and helping them develop their food safety standards and processes. So certainly an opportunity to keep working with others in that space. Does that answer your question enough?
Yeah, I think so. Vikram, what do you think of India's view around the Indo-Pacific and food safety? I know that Australia sent out a lot of barley recently.
Right. But I feel it's a huge opportunity, that both the countries have. And, especially with the India-New Zealand 2025 investing in the relationship, that's the new theme, that there is a huge possibility of both the countries coming in. And I was going through this particular, the India-New Zealand 2025 strategy coming in, and it talks about a lot of, things where both the countries can work together.
Mel, there's a question here, well, a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if you are the right person to ask or who can give some insights, but it's from an import point of view from primary industries. Like someone wants to know around I suppose, just a high-level overview around importing tea leaves. Would that, I know New Zealand's very strict on, it's not to say you can't import, but, we're getting already so much, the Tata Tea and Brookborn and all are here. But are you able to, I know it might not be your forte, but if a high-level import, it's probably an MPI kind of a question rather than Mel.
I would say that's an MPI question, but what I would say is that, New Zealand being a food producing country, it's really important, and an island nation, whose economy entirely relies on our food and fibres sector, care around biosecurity is absolutely critical to us, because if there's a biosecurity incursion that really disrupts our whole food and fibres sector, that's a massive, massive impact to our whole economy. And as a food producer, that's probably one of the things that most of us as food producers lose sleep over, is a major biosecurity.
Yeah, Mel, sorry to interrupt, but just for our viewers in India who probably are not aware of biosecurity and how strict we are, can you give them like a lesson 101 in maybe 30 seconds or something, why we are so particular about biosecurity and what does it mean?
Well, biosecurity is if you have an incursion, be it anything that's going to interrupt our animal production system or have a severe impact on our fruit production system or wine or any of our food and fibre sectors, the disruption, for example, brown marmorated stink bug is a real issue or risk, to the kiwi fruit industry. And our kiwi fruit industry is relatively small. It's relatively geographically centered around a particular geographic area, that being primarily in the Bay of Plenty. And if there was an incursion there, that would absolutely have a massive, massive impact on the kiwi fruit industry. So it can be anything from bugs, pests, diseases, bacteria. It could be anything. So New Zealand, having an economy that is entirely reliant on our food systems and our ability to export food, we just cannot take those risks. And so if we put it back to tea coming into New Zealand, we're big tea drinkers, and so I'm sure there'll be demand here for tea, but we want to be careful around that whole biosecurity space and making sure that the regulations and the standards are met to ensure there's no risk to New Zealand and our food production systems with regard to that. And I definitely would put you towards talking to the MPI folk around that to get more clarity and specific answers.
Thanks, Mel. I know we are nearly running out of time. I'll go to a last question that we've been sent to Vikram, and after that we'll just have maybe just a wrap up of this, starting from Ajay, Mel, and Vikram, maybe just 30 seconds of how you see the new norm under COVID, especially for India and New Zealand. But Vikram, a question from here is, with cases rising rapidly in India, how do you think the exporters are feeling the pinch of it with employment and any regulatory changes there that have kind of enabled them to ease it from a manufacturing and exporting point of view, or has it become hard?
So the challenges are there, Sunil. I would not say the challenges are not there. The challenges are enormous challenges. Everybody, every single organization, whether they're exporters or manufacturing, they're going through it. And because this COVID-19 is absolutely unprecedented. We've never heard about this. We've never experienced this. So the whole world is going through a challenge, and India is equally part of it. But at the same time, the government is extremely determined. And I am extremely bullish on the way India is shaping up. And I personally feel that India will come out much stronger after we are through with this COVID. And so the government is trying its best to give incentives to all businesses. And I am sure and I'm very confident that we'll come out of it much stronger. And India as an opportunity will be a huge opportunity for that. Yes. So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Ajay, we're now wrapping up. So just a brief thoughts from you.
Yeah, well, I think what I'd like to say is that we're all rearing to go. We've been relatively idle long enough because of this COVID. So let's get on with business with renewed vigor, and we can do much better. And I'm very optimistic about India and New Zealand working together and looking forward to it.
Sure. I mean, you're looks like you probably don't give a two hoot about COVID. You just want to get your hands, dirty and
I
live your life.
just want to say that the cases, like we are talking about the cases rising in India, so it's actually really a function of testing. And as you get the large population, the more you test, you will get some cases, but as a percentage thing, it's much less than anywhere in Europe or most parts of the world, per million. If you look at the number of cases, it's okay. And with China, you don't know what the real figures are. So, so that's the way it is.
Thanks, Mel.
Yeah, look, I think there's no new normal yet. I think it's a matter of shifting sands, and change has been happening in the global trading environment for a long time, and it will continue to happen. And the countries that get themselves on the front foot partner together, work together, and create trade opportunities, and give businesses and people confidence to explore opportunities and seize opportunities has got to be a good thing. And from a COVID recovery, economic recovery point of view, food security point of view, food safety point of view, and all of the things that we've discussed, we need to be getting on the front foot, being solutions focused, and really collaborative in our approaches. And I think New Zealand and India have some great opportunities, and we've got to really find ways that we can work together to achieve great outcomes that are mutually beneficial for both of us.
Yeah, thanks, Mel and Vikram.
Yeah. So just to end, I feel that both the nations have shared interests, and they need to grasp the opportunities and maintain the goodwill at international, national, operational, and personal levels. So I personally feel that this is the time to rethink, reassess, realign, and research. So, I just want to end with a quote that a person can rise through the efforts of his own mind or draw himself down in the same manner, because each person is his own friend or enemy. So let's create more collaborations and more opportunities for all of us working together in this new post-COVID-19 crisis. Thank you very much, Sunil.
Thanks, Vikram. Thank you to all the panelists here. Thank you for taking time out, and thank you to all the attendees from New Zealand and India on behalf of the chair, Samir Handa of INZBC, and also from PhD Chamber of Commerce, and from the Indian High Commission, our High Commissioner Muktesh Pardeshi and his staff, Paranjit Singh and others. Thank you so much for joining us. And our Twitter handle is PhD Chamber and also INZBC. Please do feel free to follow them and tweet, and there has been few tweets. We will also be producing a short video, which we will tweet it. So thank you very much. And I think it's just a first step of working together, using technology, etc. If we can't get on the plane, but we can still communicate this way for our members and still do business during these testing times. So thank you very much, everyone.